Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and the monitor we are checking out today is certainly unique. Not only does it have a bespoke Counter-Strike theme and aesthetic, but it's got proper esports grade specs as well, thanks to a 24-inch 1080p panel sporting no less than a whopping 600Hz refresh rate thanks to its TN technology. I'm talking about AOC's Agon Pro CS24A, a monitor designed for one thing and one thing only: proper competitive domination. Let's find out if it's worth buying.
Meet the new MSI GeForce RTX 5090 Lightning Z.
Just before we get into the review itself then, it is quickly worth clarifying that although we are focused on the AOC CS24A in this video, with the CS obviously indicating that this is the Counter-Strike model, there is also the regular Agon Pro AG246FK6 available, and this is basically the exact same monitor but just without the CS2 livery. So if you're interested in an esports grade screen but play anything that isn't Counter-Strike, then that is something worth keeping in mind. The other thing to keep in mind then is of course going to be the pricing. That's because the AOC CS24A is currently listed at £600 here in the UK, which is certainly eye-watering when you consider the fact it's a 24-inch 1080p screen using a TN panel. In theory, the AG246FK6 has the same MSRP, though at the time of writing it is on offer for £500. Either way, it is a heck of a lot of money to pay for a full HD screen in 2026. But when we consider it does also have one of the fastest refresh rates we have ever seen, could it be worth buying? We're going to find out in today's review. Starting off with the design then, the main attraction here is clearly the coloured stand and its Counter-Strike theme. Now, I'm personally not a massive Counter-Strike fan, so I can't say it appeals to me, but that's obviously going to be subjective. The one thing I would say is that it does look a fair bit different in person than it does to the online renders. Those make it look a lot more gold coloured, whereas to me it's a nice vibrant orange, though the perception does also change slightly in daylight versus when under my studio lights. There is also some RGB lighting on the back of the panel, which by default lights up in this orangey gold colour to match, but you can configure however this you'd like in the OSD. Regardless of the aesthetic, the included stand does at least offer a very good array of ergonomic adjustments, offering up to 150mm of height adjust. You get 28 degrees of swivel both left and right, tilt from -5 to +20 degrees, alongside 90-degree pivot functionality if you want to use it vertically, and VESA 100x100 mounts are also supported via an included adapter plate. As for the connectivity options, AOC includes two HDMI 2.1, one DisplayPort 1.4, a headphone jack, USB Type-B upstream, and then two Type-A downstreams on the back, with another couple of downstreams off to the right-hand side for easier access. All three of those inputs do support Full HD at 600Hz, so you're not limited there, but it is worth pointing out there's no USB-C or KVM functionality. Now, ordinarily that is something I would complain a bit more about, especially considering the price of the screen. But I think considering the fact it is a very specific use case in mind, that being gaming and esports, I don't think it's the end of the world for that kind of target audience, but do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Lastly, we can also see a small joystick is positioned on the right hand edge of the monitor to control the OSD. The OSD system itself is broadly the same as AOC's other last gen monitors, by which I mean it is using the same outdated looking menu as something like the AG276UZD, and it doesn't have the updated cleaner vibe of something like the U27G4R. The only real difference here for the CS24A is that it's now coloured orange to match the rest of the Counter-Strike theme, and it also features the Counter-Strike logo in the top left. Other than that, it still works fine and is fully featured. I just think it's a weird spot to be in where the company seemingly has two different menu systems, and I just can't work out why some monitors are still getting the old one. AOC does at least offer its G-menu software as well though, allowing control over the same settings but now directly from your PC. It can also be used to update the monitor's firmware as well, which is always a good inclusion. We're now going to move on to our panel analysis testing, where we use Portrait Display's Kalman Ultimate software alongside an X-Rite i1 Display Pro Plus colorimeter. It is worth pointing out that we're not focusing too heavily on this area. Just as I already said, this screen is very specifically targeted for gaming and esports in particular, so the actual general color performance I don't think is as important, but of course we are still going to go through everything we normally do. Starting our testing with brightness then, we can see a decent peak from the CS24A, given it hits up to 410 nits, though the minimum of just 121 nits is pretty high. On top of that, black levels are also higher than we'd like, resulting in pretty poor contrast of just around 870 to 1. Now, this is a TN panel, so it was never going to be great in this area, but AOC still claims 1000 to 1, which we are some way below. Actual screen uniformity is decent though, with no areas of concern, and that is good to see. While as for gamut, it does generally exceed the sRGB space, though it's clearly not as wide as some other monitors we've tested recently, with DCI-P3 coverage hitting 94.3% alongside 90.8% for Adobe RGB and 70.4% coverage for Rec 2020. When it comes to our grayscale testing, it is also worth pointing out that by default, the CS24A ships with the CS game mode enabled within the OSD, and this has a custom color balance and shadow boost pre-applied, obviously meant for gaming in Counter-Strike. The consequence is that grayscale is not very accurate at all, with a color balance below 6000K while gamma averages 1.748. If we disable that game mode though, things do improve with a much better color balance now, though gamma is still too low at 1.29 average. It turns out that for the most accurate results, manually switching to the gamma 2.4 setting actually gets us closer to the 2.2 target. Now, I'm not sure if this is an error or if gamma is deliberately too low, possibly for Counter-Strike advantages, but it is definitely worth being aware of. Moving on to our saturation sweeps though, these do show some inaccuracy given the gamma does generally exceed the sRGB space, but the average delta E2000 of 2.73 isn't the worst we've ever seen. Likewise, the colour accuracy isn't great, but the average of 3.56 out of the box could be worse. I do think it's unlikely that anyone needing proper colour accuracy would be looking at this screen anyway, but it's worth showing nonetheless. AOC, however, has also included an sRGB mode within the OSD, and this is an improvement over stock performance with a more accurate colour balance, though gamma is still too low and the sRGB mode now locks users out from adjusting gamma manually. Still, both saturation and colour accuracy average delta E's improve into the low 2-ish range, so it is worth using if you do want to improve accuracy. Of course, for the best results, a full calibration is required, and you can see what we were able to achieve here. Again, I really don't think this monitor is geared towards the type of person who will be calibrating for image quality, but it is still good to know what the panel is capable of. Other things to note include pretty typical backlight bleed for an LCD, though viewing angles are definitely poor, though that is also to be expected from a TN, but here you can see just how washed out the image looks from the sides and also above. It's also quite a hard thing to show on camera, but the matte coating is particularly heavy on the CS24A, and that results in a fair amount of visible coating grain, and I personally found that quite distracting during everyday use. I imagine it's been done just to help minimize reflections even more, particularly for pros who might be gaming on stages with massive lights and whatnot, but for the everyday user, again, another thing to keep in mind. As we move on to our response time testing, however, it is quickly worth clarifying that I've done all of my testing at 600Hz, rather than the 610Hz refresh rate that is advertised via the overclock function. The reason for this is that basically the difference between the two is minuscule anyway, being 0.04 milliseconds, but also using the overclock function disables MBR+, which is a key feature of this screen, so it wasn't something I was willing to sacrifice for my testing today. It's great to see AOC offer a range of overdrive modes though, from 0 to 20 as opposed to 3 or 4 different presets. OD10 is the default setting and it's not bad at all, with no overshoot and some decent response times, though it averages 3.36 milliseconds, which is some way out of the 1.67 millisecond refresh rate window. OD14 is the most optimal setting in my view, keeping overshoot to an average error of just 7.4 RGB values while improving average response time to just over 2 milliseconds. This is again still just a little outside the refresh rate window, but not by much at all, and as we will see shortly, it still looks very clean in practice. OD20 of course maxes out the overdrive, and that results in some pretty horrible overshoot, though it does at least improve average response times to 1.23 milliseconds. If we take the optimal result of 2.08 milliseconds, however, this still makes it easily the fastest LCD we have ever tested, and by quite some distance. It's still not quite at OLED levels, which are sub 1 millisecond, but it does go to show that there's still life in the old LCD yet. To give a visual representation then, we're using the Blurbusters UFO ghosting test, and I've compared OD0, OD14 and OD20. There's just a tiny bit of overshoot visible on OD14, but really nothing major at all, and certainly not something that I noticed during actual use. General clarity, you have to say, is excellent as well, with very little ghosting due to the super fast response times, while the 3 white dots look somewhat distinct on the red UFO itself. Now, as good as this is for an LCD, it is worth showing that a 500Hz OLED does deliver superior motion clarity, with the alien's eyes and those aforementioned white dots looking even clearer on MSI's 272QP-X50. Compared to the next fastest LCD I've tested though, the 520Hz PG27FFX2A from ASRock, the AOC CS24A makes a massive difference, primarily due to its response times being significantly faster, as the 600Hz versus 520Hz refresh rates themselves aren't a particularly huge difference. As mentioned though, the CS24A also offers NBR Plus technology, utilising a dual backlight system with 20 LED groups according to AOC, and that means that different areas of the panel can be strobed at different times to better reduce signal crosstalk, avoiding the double image effect. Now, it does sound similar to BenQ's Diac 2 technology, and we have asked AOC for more information, but haven't heard back yet at the time of filming. In practice though, you get a range from 0 to 20, and there is a definite clarity benefit to enabling NBR+, as you can see here. The native clarity is still very good though, so the difference isn't a complete transformation, but if you don't need adaptive sync, like if you're able to drive a constant 600 FPS in CS2, which is admittedly very doable, then I do think this feature is definitely something to keep in mind. As for all of that means for the real-world gaming experience then, it will probably come as a surprise to absolutely no one that I'm not great at CS2, so from a subjective perspective, I'm far from being able to get the most from this screen. Now, of course, that's not to say that I can't see the benefits, but a screen with a 600Hz refresh rate and response times this fast is clearly geared to those who want to get every nanosecond of advantage possible, and for esports, me personally, I'd do just as well on a 240Hz screen as I would here. Still, the motion clarity is absolutely superb as we've seen, and you do also get the benefit of super low latency due to the high refresh rate, which we measured at 0.8 milliseconds on average. Adaptive sync is also supported and it's officially G-Sync certified, but of course you can't use the enhanced NBR Plus tech with G-Sync as that only works with a fixed frame rate. Otherwise, if for whatever reason you're looking at this as a potential multi-use monitor, maybe for some multiplayer titles but then also for some other slower paced single player games, I personally wouldn't recommend it. The low contrast and generally flat image you get from the TN panel certainly isn't wonderful to look at, and I think this screen is really all about just one thing, and that is speed. So if you do want something more versatile, I think there's plenty of other options out there. Wrapping up this video then, I think AOC's Agon Pro CS24A is a very good monitor that more than meets its aim of delivering a high-grade esports experience. Of course, whether or not that means it will appeal to you is another matter entirely, as a 24-inch 1080p monitor is already a fairly niche market nowadays, not to mention the fact that this one is emblazoned with a Counter-Strike theme. Still, considering its target audience, I do think the CS24A excels. The design does add something unique even if it's not for everybody, while the 600Hz refresh rate ensures exceptional motion clarity by LCD standards. I have to admit I was a bit worried when I saw how high the refresh rate was, as I wasn't sure that the panel itself would be able to keep up, but credit to AOC as the company has tuned it very well, offering a wide range of overdrive options resulting in excellent motion clarity. Of course, there is no getting away from the fact that in 2026, a 24-inch 1080p TN panel really does feel like ancient technology, but you also have to consider this is what the pros use day in and day out, so there clearly is a market for this kind of technology. Now, of course, speaking personally, I would never really use this type of screen. Give me a 32-inch or 34-inch ultrawide any day of the week, but again, for the target audience, this is the kind of screen that they want, so who am I to say otherwise if that's your preference? Still, the fact that the CS24A is retailing for £600 probably doesn't help either, as plenty of other 4K OLEDs are indeed available at similar prices, so spending this much on such a small 1080p display would seem like madness to some people. But that brings me back to the central point of this review. For the target audience, I really do think the CS24A is excellent and is well worth buying. I can't imagine that said target audience is particularly large, and it certainly doesn't include myself, but if you are someone chasing the absolute pinnacle of esports gaming performance, at the moment, I don't think you could do much better than the AOC CS24A. Anyway guys, that is going to do it for this video. So if you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to ding that notification bell so you don't miss when we upload a new video. If you want to carry on the conversation in our Discord server, you'll find a link to that down in the description, and while there, you'll also find links to both our merch store and our Patreon if you want to help us out that way. That is it for this one though guys. I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.